Hi, and welcome to Broker Tools, where we unpack the tools, systems, and strategies that help brokers optimize the way they work. I'm Katie, your host, and today we are joined by David Beard from Property Direct. David has had an epic entrepreneurial journey from being awarded BRW's Fast 100 Growing Business 3 years in a row to facing $1 million losses just a few years later, before pivoting into the fascinating niche of disability and medical housing. In today's conversation, we are discussing the cost of growth, what it really takes to adapt, stay in the game, and fight for your vision when the world around you is telling you to give up. We unpack the highs and lows of building a multi-million-dollar business and what it truly takes to create something with impact and long-term value. David, welcome to the pod.
Thanks, Katie. Thank you. I don't know if I'm going to want to open this box up because it's this is the first time I've sat down and spoken something like this. So if you ask the questions, I'll be honest, I'll be brutal, and against myself. And the road to success I think is a lonely voyage.
Hey, it's Katie here with a quick interruption. This is just a gentle little heads up to say that in today's conversation, we address some sensitive topics that include mental health, sexual assault, and suicide. We talk about it in relation to the things that need to be considered for high care in disability housing, one of David's projects. It is for educational purposes only, so please continue to listen if you're interested to hear David's entrepreneurial journey and his vision for serving this community.
It has been a lonely voyage, and I guess for context awareness, while we have a different skin tone, we're actually family. You are technically my dad's cousin, and I've always called you Uncle David. So I have watched your voyage close up and from afar. So I would have to say this is why we're doing the conversation, because I've watched your voyage, and I think it's an important conversation to have because, like we said in the intro, you have built a business that's worth multi-millions of dollars, but you've also lost multiple millions of dollars. Before we go into all of those kinds of highs and lows, what got you started in the real estate industry?
Well, you're going back, I was doing shutdowns in the mines in the 80s, and I actually really took a union path. I ended up working at Camelco in the aluminium smelter, and I ended up being 23, I think, and I was the area site rep with 1,000 guys and 22 union delegates under me and all the different unions. And I actually was a pro-union gentleman, and while Boyne Island was being built. And one day I just realised, look, I'm just solving everyone's problems, and I'd really love to move back to Brisbane and really get involved in real estate. And I didn't know anyone in property. No one in my family had been in property. And, so I gave them a few months' notice, leaving up at Camelco, and we had a housewarming party at Manly. And I opened up the Courier Mail and got a job the next morning, and I had a job at 9 a.m. In Capalaba in a real estate job. And I absolutely started from a clean sheet of paper. And that was really Capalaba in I guess 84. And since then, I guess I've been in property one way or another. And I thought the other day, there's only been 2 years since then, I've actually had a job with a salary. The rest has all been hand to mouth, what you do, your business. Obviously back in the day, it was your sales. And, when you're on commission only, you're not carried anywhere. Like literally, you live and die by the sword. So I guess when I was left from a salary position back at Camelco, and then I got into real estate on a commission only job, and we just really Donna fell pregnant with our first child, Zane, and I'm in a commission only role. Well, there's nowhere to hide. You got to make it happen. And we actually had just bought our first house too, and just in time for all the interest rate rises to come through, which killed work, which killed, so I actually had a baptism. We had a baptism of fire pretty quickly, So by the time that we were 25, we bought a house facing losing it and changed career. And I almost went back to Camelco, but I left Camelco saying that I can have more good days than bad days. And when you're up there, every day is just the same. So I just started a trajectory, and where I ended up. And ultimately, as we weaved through all those chapters, one of those life-changing decisions that ultimately all worked out.
Yeah. And I guess being in the real estate side of things versus like mortgage brokers, there's no trail commission inside of that.
No, and there's so many. I didn't realise just there were so many other market forces. What I always thought when I got into real estate, that it's literally up to you. Well, when the tide starts changing, the wind starts changing, and interest rates, you've actually got to dig deeper, change strategy, be better at generating leads, looking after clients. Like anyone can. There's that old saying that you can teach an orangutan to sell. When the market, but when the weather's all changed and it gets all choppy, and no one's sure, like the first layer of the lightweights go, and then it just literally starts taking people out of the industry, which is sort of supply and demand. It means fewer people are in there, there's less competition. But, unless you know your business and know how to create leads, know how to look after clients, and the mechanics of your business, you're going to, be knocked out. And I guess that's the difference, whether you're a spectator and you're just in the business, or you actually know how it works. And literally, if you want to throttle it up, you really need to know that. But if you need to survive a storm, then you really need to know how to, wind it up and capitalize on it. And that's probably where the greatest opportunities lay. When the market's booming, that's when you get lost, because everyone comes in and it's easy to look good. And this is where, and I don't want to cast against agents out there today, but a lot of them are driving Range Rovers and doing very well, and they confuse their success with just the market success. And they could easily think, I'm just a lot smarter than the guys from the previous generation and the previous generation before that. Well, I can tell you, I'd spent a month in Western Australia in a car, generating leads to try and sell them some property back in Queensland. Like I'd gone overseas, and literally no one was buying in Brisbane. And you literally have to find out where there was buyers, go and find them, bring them back, work through banks, so literally, or you could just change into. But once you learn how to feed yourself and you know how to work it, you just got to go and put other strategies in place. But this is sort of like life, and finance brokering is the same. But when everyone's out chasing loans, I suspect, there's just infinite number of people getting into the business and infinite amount of people getting well paid. But, it's when the market's being decimated, that's when characters are made. And I guess, given that I got in 84 and we've seen the tide go in and out and been caught, and as you alluded to, my age, well, the older you get, potentially the riskier it is, because, you can fall flat on your feet in your 20s and your 30s. But as the game changes and you get a mortgage and your kids through school and, paying for private education, the stakes are that much higher. You just can't, I'll sell my car. That doesn't cop it. So I guess being in a commission-only environment where, you stop, you starve, it teaches you a set of business principles and drive. But as you get older, there's fewer people like that. And, and then you've got really to risk, you've got money put there for your retirement. And do you still risk that? Because when you're young, you can always bounce back. But, as you get older, the game changes. Then, of course, there's your energy levels, and people probably don't believe in you anymore as much as, you're a young buck in your 20s, 30s, 40s, you're going to change the world. But when you get to a certain age and you say you're going to change the world, it's let grandpa go.
But I also, yes, despite your age, I've always seen you as like the 20 version of you throughout your different ages. Even though you're technically aging, I can still see the person that I always remembered you as a little kid. But in saying that, I think part of the reason, and I've observed, is that your drive mostly comes from the passion of the vision that you have for yourself and the world around you. And I think if you don't have those type of things in place, it's really hard to hold through those good times and those bad.
Look, I think it's one of life's chapters, right? I talk to my kids about it, forever, and they're probably into it varying degrees, but then that's everyone's individual journey. But every January 1, I'd sit and find a quiet place to map out the year ahead. And as I say, don't start a week until you know what you want from it. Well, don't start a day, don't start a week, don't start a month, don't start a year. Know what you're playing for. And literally that sets your sail. I've always been very passionate about, polishing your life. And that's your fitness. I get up every morning at 3:40 and head into town for a workout. I've had a gym partner for 25 years. We work out together, then go to breakfast and talk shit. And, the way that you mold your life with your fitness, your marriage, probably going to come out, but I met my wife when I was 18 and, she was 19, so we've been together eons, and part of your marriage falls into, polishing your marriage of where you want it and your physical fitness and where you see yourself and your finances and your business principles. All form part of that. And when you sit and you map all that out, and, going back, I was told, like walk into the Porsche dealership or walk into the car dealership and, and I had almost so many brochures, but ultimately it's your core DNA. And, I really struggled when I was a pup because I knew that people weren't interested in what I was interested in, right? And it could have been, well, was certainly Porsches, I go, man, you seen those Porsches? And no one really knew or cared. I knew all the models. In fact, they brought a Porsche in 88. It was a 959 Porsche back in the day. And I remember going and sitting outside the dealership waiting for it to be delivered, right? Because I'd heard it was coming into Australia. And it's a very rare Porsche, but I didn't know why I was interested, right? I don't know. I remember driving past Manly Marina with a mate when I was moving out of my house. So we probably had to move because I was doing it tough. And we drove past Royal Queensland Marine. I said, man, it's all those blokes. And he said, Dave, let's face it, they're not for blokes like you and I. And I couldn't believe it. Well, I don't know. So, most people don't dream. And, I've just loved, we're in such a fantastic part of the life. We've been here for hundreds of thousands of years and just have a look at our life, what our phones can do. And I think life is just so fantastic. But, it really is carved out, and look, there's a great book I read, Jim Collins' is Good to Great. And a lot of people have a good life, good marriage, good job, good car, good health. But it's subscribing to great. Not a good marriage, a great marriage. A good relationship with the kids or a great relationship with your kids. A good house or a great house. And running your life, not good, but great. And there's tools in there to achieve that. And look, I can tell you, I've got a, great marriage, fantastic. I've got a couple of kids and 6 grandkids, and I'm blessed in so many areas. My health's great. I've got a great house. We live on waterfront down at Raby Bay. I've got a nice boat in the pontoon, and great friends. And a couple of years ago, I thought, well, what's ridiculous? What's a real stretch? A ridiculous, good to great to ridiculous. And, there's the ridiculous cars, what would be a ridiculous holiday to take all your grandkids, right?
Yeah.
Take them all to Disneyland, the whole family, 12 of them, that would be ridiculous. And, and you define goals by, to me, what's ridiculous? Well, what would be a ridiculous boat to have on your pontoon? And if you're asking me, the Horizon FD75, oh, that'd be ridiculous, right? So, what would be a ridiculous car to have, to take to morning coffee or to go for a drive day, right? And everyone's got their own version of whatever that is. And with AI, you can put yourself in the picture, right? And if you look at what your goals are, or things that you're playing for, I've always viewed life like a game of Sale of the Century, or, what you're playing for. And knowing what your goals are, and people wouldn't even ask me because they know they're probably going to get this freaking, pretty clear picture. Oh, this and this and this right through the year, and these are the things I'd like to do next year. And that's your business and your private and your health. And if you've got that goal up there, and then you look at what you do, and if they don't marry up, you've really got a problem. Like if you want a ridiculous boat or a ridiculous house or ridiculous holidays, and then you sit on the couch until 10 o'clock, then I don't understand it. And if you've got a very clear goal and that's your wife and everyone's on board and you're going for it, and then you marry up your plan. So you have got to have it written, goals, dates, and look, I've got like even here, I've got on my desk, right? I've got a note written to myself, right? My pledge, open all before the 1st of the 5th, 2035. I've got a 10-year plan of my exit strategy. People think it might be out before 10 years, but I've got it in writing. And I've got one of those on my desk under my keyboard, and I've got another one I keep in I've got a little where I keep watches, and I've got it in there. So I've made a pledge to myself, right, of where I want to be. And so those goals of what you want, and some of them are pretty shallow, like boats and cars and all those things. There's some very deep ones there for my kids and grandkids that I don't even talk to them about. They're just private things that I would like to do. And of course, Donna's my wife is involved in this, but most people can only take a small chapter of what you're doing. I mean, you're going out on Friday nights, if anyone asks me what's going on, I usually apologise in advance, because when you press play, there's just a lot to talk about. And, most people aren't interested, particularly at my age. And the people I've got are all, I guess, my friends are largely sold out, financially independent, and they think I'm retired. I'm sure most people, and particularly if they're watching this on Facebook, would think that all I do all day is with my kids or going in the boat or take the cars for a drive. Most people wouldn't even know what's going on in my head because no one is interested. They just, and your wife, she just wants her husband, the kids just want their granddad, and no one's really interested in hearing what goes on in your head. But if you've got goals and aspirations and you can write them down, it's such a private journey. It is such a private, intimate thing to sit there and find out what you want to do. And, everyone's got a hot button. You just got to find it and then articulate it and go, okay, is my business plan going to take me to that? And if it's not, you need to look at your business plan, right? And is that going to get me there? You can't have an international business goal and then be mowing lawns. Right now, look, I've mowed lawns when I needed money back in the day, but is that really going to get you where you want to go? So your goals directly relate to your business plan. And with AI, there's just so many tools at your disposal. But then you've got to be prepared, and this is what cuts people. A lot of people want to get there, but are they prepared to walk through the valley of death? And that's and anyone can be happy when they're kicking goals. Anyone can be happy, Even some people aren't when they're kicking goals, but doing very well.
Yeah, well, let's take it back a bit, because I think ultimately we are trying to discuss the cost of growth, and goals are probably the paramount part for you and how you got through a few things. But for those who don't know, let's take us through your journey, because obviously you started off in real estate.
Yes.
And then you pivoted into construction, because is that right? I'm saying it's construction, but
Well, look, I was just selling land. I ended up working for a developer, selling land, and back in the early 90s. And a friend who saw how far I was going around Australia to bring back was selling acreage. And, that was where I thought was opportunity. And I had friends selling apartments, and they'd have people from the suburb walk in and buy them, and I had to go to the other side of the world to bring back clients to buy a big block of land, And they offered me a partnership if I came and got into apartment sales for them. And they offered me a third of the company. And I can tell you it lasted 3 months because I just couldn't believe no one really wanted to do anything. But anyway, for one reason or another, it didn't work, and I left, and for the sake of everybody. And I literally had nothing. Right, but I knew that wasn't going to work. I didn't want to go back, and we were working for one of the biggest developers in town. And I told him I'd resigned and I'd gone away, and I'll just go back and do what I used to do. And he'd really taken a shine to me. He was a brutal developer, right? But I never bullshitted to him, right? Where everyone else wanted to bullshit to him, right? I didn't bullshit. Anyway, he sacked everyone off the site, and it was a $100 million project back in '97. Wow. And as it turned out, he wanted me to apply to run the project. And I didn't even have a corporation license. I didn't have anyway, I knew real estate people, everyone was a bit lost. So I said, look, I can put a real estate team together. He said, well, why don't you do that, Dave? And anyway, I did. And I just said, I'll go down interstate and see some of the property. Well, the company that did have the project said that they won't be involved in the project if I'm involved. And you just should never talk to the developer that way. And he said, right, Dave, you've got the whole job. Hope you can do it. And that was the biggest project in town. And I just had a dozen salespeople I knew. And then I always thought they were pretty good, but I didn't have my corporation real estate license. So we went from nothing to the biggest project. If you drive over the Story Bridge and you look to the right-hand side, the old Carlton United Brewery site, that whole project was our first project. And we then got involved in inner city apartments, and we went on to sell 6,000. We were probably the number one there for ages. We did Felix, Aurora. We just did new apartments and townhouses. We had a 600 square metre super office in the town. We had a team of 50. You know, we were really the fourth in new property sales in Brisbane. We did that for decades. But, you know, that really, I probably spent a fair chunk of that trying to get out of it. But we were just so tattooed to it that I could never really get out of it. And we did a few developments ourselves at Alex Perry in Fortitude Valley. And we really all went arse up when Brisbane floods came through. In 2013, 2014, we bought a building in West End and everything just exploded at the same time. We had the building got flooded that we had where we had our office and our projects. Brisbane market died and the bank started calling in, you know, their loans and LVRs, and they revalued our commercial property, and that was down through the floor. And then it was just one thing after another. We just ended up, I sold about nine properties, and all the money we had to just try and chug all the way through. And I was in my mid-50s, I guess, early 50s. And really everything we put away for our retirement, we ended up putting logs on the fire. And, you know, I was just thinking this morning, you know, we had a letter from our bank, from the solicitor, the bank, and saying they wanted $3 million in 7 days.
Well,
you know, they'll be taking action. You know, they wanted out. And I didn't have $3 million, and Donna and I didn't know what to do. And I can tell you, one of the people at my breakfast table was the director of the solicitors firm sitting opposite me. And I never brought it up to him. You know, like it was just one of the things that you got to deal with, and we didn't know whether there was going to be locks on the door. But as it worked out, you know, we just keep selling properties, and I had some, you know, fortunately enough assets to just keep throwing logs on the fire until we ultimately sold it. And then, you know, there was a big delta between what the payout was and what we sold it for because of the war with the floods, and we had to stick more money in that. And we basically sold out with really just barely the seat of our pants, you know, but we were all intact. And we moved our office into a rented Queenslander with just, I think there's probably 4 people. We've gone from 50 down to 4. And you're talking about growth. Anyone can go forward when you're expanding. But when you take a big team and have to go back to just a couple of people, and everyone starts getting out, right? And you've got to reshape positions. But we did that, and that really happened over a number of years. And then we really started doing focus groups on high care homes. Thought, well, you know, like I don't want to, we bought management rights, we moved into caretaking. We really taken a different approach to our business, you know, doing a lot more things that gave us, you know, residual money, you know, owning management rights, and then, you know, dialing away from doing big projects, which you always have to wait so long before, and whether you got money or you didn't get money, depending on the project completed. So we went off into high care homes, and we didn't plan on being a housing provider, but we ended up becoming a housing provider. And, you know, as you heard me say, you know, it's like diving off a cliff and building a plane as you go. We ended up being a housing provider. We just ended up doing everything around the ecosystem of high care homes. And now we've got 120 high care homes. We've got 65 companies providing care in those homes. We've probably got 200 high care quadriplegics in our homes. We own the Disability Housing Centre. So we've ended up putting this whole ecosystem together around high care residents, bringing private investors. They own the home, they're our floor plans, we enrol them, we source the participants and the facilities who provide the care, and if anyone wants out, we resell it. And there's probably just about 15 of us, probably one of the larger ones now, just in high care homes. and really just walked away and got all of our competitors together and said, we're out. I'm never going to go to another meeting again. And really just over 6 months, just transitioned our company into just being a high care company with, you know, the vulnerable people, and just reapplied our skills.
Yeah. So just to recap, ultimately you went from real estate into development. You did a partnership agreement with someone that fell through. So you tried to do something with someone and you realized that that partnership agreement really wasn't aligned with you and your values and what you wanted to do. But you were really lucky in the way that the person who owned the land and really wanted to develop it actually liked you.
Yeah.
And wanted to work with you. And because of that particular relationship, and the other person not wanting to work alongside you, you got to, I always say, so for me, I feel like my career is the career of drop and roll. Do you know what I mean? Where someone has dropped me in an environment and you have to roll with it as you go along. I feel like that's similar to what you're saying, but you're using a plane analogy. Someone has given you a plane, but it's all in pieces. And you're having to assemble it as you.
Yeah, and I got past the ball and I hung on to it. And, you know, we ended up doing a number of projects for that developer, heaps of them. And we did them for everybody else too. And, you know, we got a sink or swim. And I can tell you, the company that I left didn't last long. And, you know, and look, I went there because it was a great product and what everyone was doing. But at the end of the day, you know, it just didn't align with, well, I probably didn't align with them really because, you know, like I probably was just a bit too intense and you know, to get things going, you know, where everyone was sort of pretty cruisy, which is pretty fat and lazy, you know, they're all happy to go along and, you know, let's go and make it rock and roll. And
you're like, let's go.
I was in my late 30s.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I actually, they had these sales records there at the time, and I think it was 37 sales in a month or something. There was someone, and the first month I was there, I broke it, right? And, you know, to me, I just couldn't believe how easy it was, you know, and you know, and really what it was, I think, was no one really wanted that lightning bolt. And, well, certainly not up top. But anyway, it all sort of worked out for the better. We went on to do projects. And, you know, that was probably one of life's biggest lessons where, you know, we had a lot of good people with us, but a lot of people who I've probably been still a bit dark on some of the loyalty that you show to people and how you support them, but only how, you know, there's probably 12 people spun out of our company and set up competition, 12. I can't think of anyone that's still going, maybe one, but then they've rebirthed into another company. You know, that we took over 11 companies, you know, it's dog eat dog, you know, it's a viper pit. And, you know, there's that saying, you know, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Right?
Yeah.
You know, and we took over a lot of businesses. A lot of people suffered over motivation, spun out their own companies, and that was just project marketing. And you know, it was very difficult through those periods. Everyone got paid through everything. No one ever. People came back probably 3 times. They'd leave, set up a company, come back, and you know, I'm never judged during execution. Life, you know, like I'll never make life difficult for somebody. You know, I'm on my own lane. You know, so people can, you know, I'm disappointed at their loyalty, but at the end of the day, if they knock on the door and they want to make up, you know, I'm not that guy that will crucify them. You know, I'm not out to trip them. I'm not vindictive. You know, I'm on my own lane, which comes back down to your goals. If you know where you're going to go and you know what you want, then you haven't got time to trip up and spend wasted time chasing other people. If you've got time, go and spend it with your family, you know, and get, you know, just spend quality time with people. And if you're at work, play your own game, which is one thing which I know you didn't ask about. These people, particularly over in the States, who are all protesting, right? Placards and signs. And I can't help it. I mean, you mustn't have any goal. You know, like I'd love to walk down the street with my, you know, like I'll wave a flag and I'm very passionate about what I want. And I think too many people get caught and chasing things, other people's goals, other movements, and probably just never reflect, just spend some quiet time on dialing into themselves what are you really playing for? What is it that's really key to you? And then that just permeates through everything. Your credibility, like I would never dust anyone for a cent, right? So you get your own values, your own lane, and your own goals, and you chase them. And of course, your family and the way life works out, they all sort of come together. And people will go and infinitely go and protest on this and protest on that. I go, man, I just don't know how. Once you're passionate about your goals and you know what you want, and it oozes out of you, I just don't know how you can go and pick up a cause and pick up a placard and go wave down the street, because, more people, just did their best job of trying to live their best life, and, their staff and just drawing a bubble around everyone around you as a protected species as much as you can. And that's your kids, your grandkids, your wife. I've got a CEO, and really trying to look after everybody and take them all somewhere. And once that is clear, and it's got purpose, it's overwhelming, and really that's just your life. And I think for my age, we're all but a Saturn rocket into it. It's most of my life has had to put the brakes on, because that life won't go as fast or people aren't that interested. So matching your speed of change with the realities of life. And that's a big thing too, because not everyone is that interested of going that journey with you. You're going to go, and that's a thing too. Everyone moves at different speed, but you just do the best that you can, and ultimately, you'll get there.
Yeah, and I guess this is the thing, is that probably you're able to go through the good times and the bads because you have these like core centering values. Sure, you might not know exactly where you're going, and you've done incredible things. I think, is that correct, that you helped bring Coldwell Banker into?
Yeah. Look, and I've got to say that we went, where we were, by any stretch of the imagination, we were pretty big numbers, right? Pretty big numbers, doing big projects, doing big numbers, big teams, and my real estate experience and what I had run, and anyone I ever knew had never run what I was running in sheer volume. And the team, and we had, it was just all so big. And I wanted a model to put on top of it that could run our systems better. So I didn't feel that the suburban office was for me. So I wanted a big office, and that's why I went to Coldwell Banker, and where their big offices are freaking massive, 400 agents. And, I said about, I went to their offices and bought the franchise for Brisbane, and ultimately it's probably one of my regrets, really, because, as soon as I started and I bought the franchise, I wanted a job description for the front desk. We had 2 receptionists at the front desk, and we had a cafe in our office.
You did.
We had all our architectural models. The fit out cost me $500,000. We had architectural models of our past projects to do the resales. We owned our own finance brokerage called Realbank, REALBANC. We had our own brokers. And they told me, we don't have one, right? And literally, people who bought the franchise for Australia bought the signage, but really none of the systems. Anyway, they ended up with about 10 offices or 12 offices. And we went to a meeting in North Queensland with all the franchise holders, all the office holders around Australia. And I went there and we went around the table, and it worked out that my business was bigger than the rest of them combined, right?
Oh.
And there was no way I could get help. They wanted to be where I was, and I just really wanted to get I was struggling with project marketing, resales, finance, and I didn't even really finish high school. So, and we were doing well. As you said, we had 3 BRW Fast 100 awards. We were flying, and just really managing all that, just managing all that. And look, and we did, and we didn't fail at anything. But when the shit hit the fan, and we tried to diversify in our own projects and just trying to change our model. And look, our company, by the way, is 30 years old next year. So we lasted, but we just had to, put more meaning and behind our IP. And instead of just being, and it wasn't really an insult, but it was never really me. It was just, Dave can sell. Right. And I never really, sure, yeah, that's important, but I just don't want to be the hired gun. And ultimately we were just the hired guns. And, no matter what the market, no matter what we had to sell at whatever price, just get Dave and his team in. And that's okay, I guess, but you really want to do something more rewarding and intellectually stimulating. And when we went off into high care homes and you meet the residents and you meet the participants, and this was before the NDIS, or really the NDIS was coming out, and I read the Productivity Commission report, which is 400 pages, 440 pages or something, about where the NDIS was going and what the need was for specialist homes. So I just thought, well, why don't we do a focus group with the disability space and see what sort of homes are needed? And I can tell you, because we've done focus groups at Cannondale and everything, all these new projects we were doing. Well, let's do a focus group on a floor plan for high care homes. I mean, who's ever done that?
So you're saying that after all this time in all these other kind of normal build projects, you saw an opportunity within high care homes. You saw that somehow along the way that buildings weren't being really created for those with disabilities.
That's right. No one had asked the questions, and I didn't know, right? And that was probably, I didn't know, and the only way you're going to know, because if you look at design or what needs are, you've really got to be looking forward, not back. And everyone's an expert of where everyone's gone and what's built. But really, even our new projects, it's the projects, if you're ever doing a project, you've got to, otherwise you compete with the second-hand market. If you're going to do a new project back in the day, it's really where it's going, not where it's been, because you got to, chances are you're going to have a new price rise and you've got to offer something new. So if we're going to go into the disability space, into the high care homes, I mean, I know what's there, and even though it's not good enough, but what's needed. So we did what we thought, and then we did 3 of them on the north side, south side, and in New South Wales. And we went to socials and, called the disability sectors together, and we had some floor plans that we made up and all done in 3D and coloured them like we would have done for a normal, new project. And I can tell you, if it's one of the biggest things I've underestimated, was me standing at the front of that, right? I literally, I'm looking at my CEO, my CEO now, and I'm looking at her and I'm going, I've absolutely underestimated this. There's shit on their liver, right? And there was just so many people, so many problems, it was just so much heat in the room, and I literally wasn't prepared for it, right? I got to say, I wasn't prepared for it. So, we had a project, we did a focus group at Caboolture, and people, the carers, had driven down from Maribor because they'd heard about it and wanted to come and tell us what they thought the homes needed to be. And they said, you're talking about disadvantaged people and needing new homes. You want to see them? You come up and drive and we'll walk you through them, right? So we did. I grabbed Bruce, don't know if Bruce listens, but Bruce Allen, who's been with me, well, he obviously came up with us. He's our land acquisitions manager. This is back in 2018. He came up. Emma, who's our CEO, she came up with me, and we got escorted through some homes, and with the high care people there, and they were profoundly disabled. And a guy had got out of his truck, and he got some flashing lights behind him, so he put his truck over, and he opened the door up. Another truck behind that came through and cleaned him up as he got out of his truck. And they had put him in hospital in a coma, and he was severely damaged, mentally damaged. And what, they gave him a meal while he was, obviously still cognitively impaired. And they gave him meatballs, and he couldn't move anything, but he just stuck his face down and ate it and choked on it. He couldn't chew. And they found him, and he ended up with a second brain injury from lack of oxygen because he choked on his food. So he'd had 2 major injuries. And we were with him, and he had all of his photos of what his previous life was around him, and it was just, man, it was just so overwhelming. And when we met the people, met in the homes, and it was going, man, this is just... So anyway, you come back and go, right, we've got to change these things. And so we set about delineating living areas, so the carers had their own entrance and exit, because the carers and all the high care residents live in the same place. We wanted to delineate so they had their own residence. We gave them a little Siebel suite because all of our residents need 24-hour care, so we put a care room in. And, you know, they've all got emergency power and 18 square metre bedrooms, all specialist homes, but they look like homes from the street. So yeah, we ended up listening to what's needed, coming up with our own floor plans, trying to dial out some of them. You know, the biggest killer of our residents is suicide. The lowest morale of any working group in Australia are our carers. So, you know, when you're designing a home, these are some fundamental points. The people who work there and the people who live there are worst in class, right? And our residents don't want to be there. And you're a road trauma victim, and you wake up and you're quadriplegic, can't communicate. So we you know, they're called SDA smart homes because we knew that technology is going to play a big part. You know, the people can't communicate. They saw themselves. They can't communicate with the support workers. They're out there. You know, they've got to try and bang the wall and get someone to come in and if they need a drink or something. You know, so we, which is part of this in 2020, you know, we've been trying to get more technology into our homes, and I approached Samsung, I approached everybody that you know, like such a long list of people want to, you know, we've got the homes, we're building them, but we really need to leverage more technology into the home because our people are so incapacitated. And when you walk in there, it is so freaking moving and no one gives a shit. And, you know, we're building the homes and I just can't tell you how no one was interested, like no one. And I had one company that was interested in town, and the weeks before, it was probably a month before the completion of this home at Strathpine, they thought, we just don't want to do it anymore. It's a bit hard. And we had to pull all this stuff out of the walls, and we were months of, like, the roof was on, we had to sort of figure out some technology platform we didn't know. So, you know, it's really a lonely voyage until we had our office at Oxford and Billimba, and we were putting on a lot of people, and we had a few homes under construction, and I employed people from the NDIS to guide us on the homes. And Emma, who was general manager, walked in and she said, you know, Dave, you've got another person starting in the company. Where do you want them to sit? Because we're all pretty tight, you know. And, you know, because we were back growing again. This was 2020. And I said, I'll tell you what, Em, I'll go. You move into my desk, we'll make you a potential CEO. We'll move everyone up line to make them managers, and we'll do a whole new model. I'll go, right? And I'm going to go and see if I can start this technology, right? Because no one cares, but we keep trying to do too many things at once, which is why I walked away from projects. You've really got to nail it and spend time doing it. So I said, we'll put you in this role. We'll do it for 2 years. I'll get your CEO training. We'll get a whole advisor in to run through everyone's roles. And I said, because, you know, I just do everything the way that we do it, but we really need someone to come in and do some corporate training. So I walked out, and that was September 2020. And she stepped into my role, and I walked out of the office to leave them all to it, right? And a month later, I'm at the cafe at Milton, 5:30 in the morning, you know, standing there waiting for, you know, coffee. And a guy who'd come in most mornings as well for his coffee, he'd seen me pull up in a few different cars over the times, and he said, Dave, what do you do? What do you do? I said, well, actually, we build high care homes, but I said, I'm trying to make them smart, but no one gives a shit. And he says, well, Dave, I own an aerospace company and I'll do it with you. I said, really? He says, yeah, I'll do it with you. So we turned around and we set up a technology company in October 2020 called Aerial Care. If you go on look at it, aerial.care. And in fact, I was on the phone with 2 minutes before, you know, you rang. So, man, I'm about to do my first podcast. And we've got a platform where we built communicators, right? That goes to an aerial smartwatch, you know, a smartwatch where bedside communicators, an analog, a digital. You know, we built this whole technology suite, and it's just insane. And right now we built what we call a Care B&B app that sits in the hospital beside the bed, that nurses can find accommodation for because we've got the high care homes. But, you know, the resident needs to go, say, down Adelaide, you know, we've got a spare room. They can, you know, find a home, high care home, high physical support home, tap it and book it, right? And that's all the bed blockers that are out there. We got a phone call at midday today about it, right? So we started a technology business to feed in for our high care residents. And, you know, I didn't plan to have a technologies. I went and did a conference. I went and spoke at a group on AI and leveraging technology. Right?
Yeah.
I'm doing a PowerPoint presentation on leveraging technology into a high care space. Right? And everyone's sitting there listening. Right? And I couldn't believe it. Right? Because you know what, I was just the guy who sold.
Yeah.
Right?
So
And,
what
you know,
you're saying is that in your mind, you were just a property guy who did project developments, and now you were able to put in a CEO in place of managing the property development. And as a property development company now, you really only specialize in disability housing.
Right.
But because of all that you saw within the disability housing sector, you realized that there was a bunch of technology that those who were going through that really could do to have a better, more facilitated life. And that's where aerial care came in.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like, our residents aren't going to do it. Right?
No, they don't have the capacity.
Stroke victims requiring 24-hour care. The support workers, are they going to come up with a technology platform?
No.
No. The SIL operators, what they call them, who run the home, you know, and we've got 65 companies that do that. Are they going to do it? I don't think so. You know, so, you know, if you literally, you know, I just have found such deep empathy, and someone needs to give a shit. And, you know, technology's there and no one cares. You know, like, it was a real bee in my bonnet, because, you know, you drive through a set of traffic lights and you might be on your phone and I can detect that, right? Well, what about, you know, girls are 3 times more likely, maybe even higher than that, 6 times more likely to be sexually assaulted disabled women, right? You know, so, you know, sensors can detect things. So we said about sensors detecting sexual assault, you know, choke detection. Our residents are 100 times more likely to die from choking because, you know, their neck muscles just don't get used. So there's so many things that technology can do, but no one cares. So, you know, like, you know, maybe you got to be the dumbest person, right? And says, well, maybe I can, maybe you can. And, you know, we've tried to do that because someone needs to care. And look, and I can tell you, I put hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in it. And have I made any money out of it? No, right? But, you know, it's if you're sitting in bed, you would want someone who is going to try. It was, and actually what we did, our pilot made the national 7 p.m. national news on Channel 2. Full page in the Courier Mail. No one cares, right? No, you know, like I can tell you, I went to Ampol because, you know, we've got road trauma victims, and I thought maybe with our pilot they could just come and buy a tablet, just to show someone is interested in helping. Nothing. No, not interested. You know, like I just went to so many people, the energy companies, because everything we're doing is powered by electricity. Would they be interested? You know, we'll give them all the free publicity, you know, but someone come and help us. No. Grants, right? No, okay, grants, we'll try that. Nah. You know, so really, when I say success is a lonely voice, and this, you know, like, you've never heard me talk about the money being the motivator, but, you know, you need the money to help fund it, because no one's coming out and helps you. Like, and I can tell you, life is so full of people who will tell you the problem and endlessly talk about it. And this is probably one of the biggest things when I got into the sector. I couldn't believe it. I was going to so many meetings and everyone would only just talk about the problem. And it was like they were perpetual talkers on the problem and not doing anything about it. And when you come from the property game and you come from commission only and you come back by DNA, you've only got to hear the problem once. Or you've only got to be told, okay, let's do something about it. And I've gone to meeting upon meeting upon meeting, and all I heard was talk. And you know, well, I'll do it. And someone starting without the tools, having a crack, is literally what these people need. And we put together some fantastic technology. And, you know, and I'm not even sure how it all fits together yet. You know, but no one's, you know, we're trying to give the home an operating system. But I'll tell you this, we met with Apple early last year, Apple Australia. I'm talking Apple Australia.
Yep.
We're introducing VR into our homes, and they bought the Apple Pro because our people can't go virtual skydiving, virtual skin diving. You know, like we wanted to give our residents who could go in a virtual world and leave their bed, and we felt VR was a portal to that. And within there, you can use your eyes to control. You know, we thought you get them doing banking, buying flowers for their wives, and doing all sorts of things, right?
Yeah.
So we've got technological tools. So we went and did a demonstration to Apple Australia. We had 3 or 4 of them online from their technical platform. And we showed them what we're doing. We walked them all through it. And we ended up having 3 meetings. The third meeting, they came back and said, you know what, we've never seen anyone doing this in the world. We went and searched the globe. No one is doing it. Right?
Oh,
That was from Apple. That was from Apple Australia. We knew no one was doing it. And, you know, the things that we're trying to do, you know, are so good, revolutionary, but we're flying a bit blind. And, but to have a home with high care, and there's so many things that a home could do more. You know, all it can do is send a beep out when it's burning down. Like, you've spent how many $1 million on a home, and it'll just let you know if it's burning down. Have a look at your phone, have a look at your car. You know, and we believe that a home can have an operating system that's upgraded every few years, and the residents walk in there, be it fall detection, sexual assault, you know, all sorts of things, and in the bedroom, and the bed being part of that with a smart bed, that fever detection, choking detection. But, you know, it's a slow road, but, you know, you're only here once, you know, and you know, when these people move into our homes, you know, you're their ambassador. You got to try and make a better tomorrow. And that's just that side. And now we're moving into a new line of homes for memory care. You know, that there's so many areas down there that need someone who gives a shit. And, you know, when you have that, your goals, you know, like, we need to do more, we want to go somewhere, and you never arrive. You know, like, you know, your goals, you never arrive. And in business, you never arrive. You know, as you probably, maybe you heard me say once before, that, you know, business is like a game in Nintendo. You never win. It just allows you to go to the next level. It's a bit more complicated. And the stakes get a bit higher. Either a bigger team, more people, more regulation, and, you know, the stakes are bigger. And that's it. We added the technology come up.
Yeah.
And look, and I can tell you that I've got a meeting with the ATO tomorrow, because they've questioned, we did an R&D tax offset, and how much of our office we put about 10% aside for detection of the sensors of an area, and they're coming tomorrow to question me on whether I did put 10% away of our floor area. You know, what was the floor area, and how much time did I spend a day on aerial care? You know, like, man, you know, like, so not only do you not get a free runway, you know, that even, you know, you just get questioned on so much, you know, that makes it difficult. But if you're passionate and your cause is strong, right, and it gets more complicated, it may get tougher, but this is what gets you up in the morning.
Yeah, and I think these are the things that motivate you, because getting through like, for everything that you've done so far, you've pretty much started at ground zero. Like, when you started first in property development, you didn't know. You built it as you went along. You then, over time, realized that the whole industry wasn't for you. So then you moved over into a version of it, but it became disability focused, which was really helpful because you got to niche down. And through that, you learned about technology or care that, let me reword that. You learned that people in a disability state needed technology to support them. For example, there are threats to people who are unable to move. Some people might choke them or assault them in a way that is not okay. And typically females more than men get assaulted. And so having the technology in the room to help prevent the abuse that might occur in a disabled environment was something that you became aware of that needed to be built. And then you just so happened, because while we didn't talk about this, you were the Porsche club. You know, you love a good Porsche and you love your cars and things like that. And so because you were driving around in a vehicle somewhere, hey, I'm curious what you do, because people who own a Porsche obviously are not short of money. And so that obviously sparked a conversation with somebody who happens to be in Aero, who understands technology, which was really helpful for the catalyst. But at the end of the day, the way I see what has happened for you and how you've gotten through everything is that you have a deep love and care for people and have deep, strong values. And that's what's helped you get through most of these things. Because if you didn't have the people or the surroundings, half your goals or visions really wouldn't work, but it's because you can totally visualize and you can totally see your path forward, that you've been able to reiterate, and now you're going into memory care, and that's like support for people who have dementia.
That's, you know, when I wanted to steer the company, because you never arrive, like innovate or evaporate. Like that's your business. Well, certainly in property, markets change, everything changes. So you've got to look at where you want to be in 5 years' time. And I really want to have that momentum being in a specialist territory. And we were in projects, and but things change, and the entry is probably a bit low. How we found it in there. You really, from my side, you need to get into something a bit more compliant, a bit harder to get into. More money involved, because at least then you probably less people chasing you. But I laid out a path late last year of the direction I'd like to take the company, and I've got a great team. And I told you about our CEO. Well, she came out of uni with a business degree 12 years ago, and she worked with me while she was finishing a degree. And I've got a fantastic leadership team, all females, right? And they run the show. But I can tell you, back in 2020, 2021, I used to drive to the office and just drive past it, because I'm just so used to driving to the office, right? I just drive past, and I wouldn't go in, but I was just so used to driving to the office, I'd just drive in. And then see, I needed management too, because I'd always, if I wanted to speak to someone, I'd email them or call them, right? And I had to change that. So your mind's always asking questions or something you thought of. So I had to set every week, every fortnight, a CEO meeting. And when I stepped over the line, I said, look, you run the place. I'm not going to talk to anyone in the team anymore. I'll talk to you. You have your weekly meetings, with your team, and then I'll have a fortnightly one with you, and we'll have a monthly report. Right? So, when we signed up to where we were going, and I needed managing, right? Fortunately, I didn't harass her, let her do her job, which is another bit of business growth, letting other people, right,
do their job,
lay out the plan. And I've always had time for these film producers who, how do they get that vision and all the way down the line, interpreting it. And I think, they spell out the vision, where we're going, and then they leave it to the experts who can do those things in sound and film, and let the people do the job. You go out and lay the vision. So when I got the opportunity to lay out where we're going, and then I spend that front row needling and putting that bit together. And late last year, I sent probably, must have been 7 pages, a lot of pages on how I see us going next year and the year after and the year after. So I'd taken a few days to drive down with a friend to drive Bathurst. Right? We were taking a couple of our cars down just to spend some time, doing some boy things. And I sent a message to my CEO. I said, Em, I'm going to email you something, and I'd like to spend the next 2 weeks reading it, doing your due diligence, and we'll catch up in 2 weeks' time, and I'd like to know what you think, right? And I can tell you, when I sent it, I wanted to be speaking to her that afternoon, and then the next day, and the next day. But she then sent me a message, yep, ready when you are, Dave. So, and I remember I pulled into a servo, right? I had it all ready for it. I sent it right. Now that I view that as right. Well, I've gone and set that off. Let's just see what the response comes back, right? Because it's not my vision. I really need her, because she's got people. I need everybody in this, right?
Yeah.
So I spelled it out pretty comprehensively. I felt the why. And then I was so looking forward. I just couldn't wait to get back and talk to her. And I did. I met her. And she was as sold as me. In fact, I thought when I walked down there, man, she might be this more than me, right? and that's how it's been, right? And that involves everybody. My accountant, telling everyone what we're doing, and we're now becoming an aged care provider, right? So we're going through the due diligence of becoming an aged care provider. Letting everybody know that while we're doing that, and working that through life at the Christmas party, so letting everybody know and letting this vision be everybody take ownership. And I can tell you, then Ariel care with Mark, I had to go and have a meeting with Mark, and I told him the direction I'm taking the company. You know, so there's my wife, everybody. You know, so have this silo that you're building this vision over the next 5 years of how you want to go. And I haven't got too many moves left, right? So which means increasingly I need to let the business do the work and the team do the work. So I'm only going to, you know, as I said, I've got a plan where I want to be in 10 years. I don't want to plan to take more than 10 years, right? So, you know, I've got this plan. I laid it out. I visualized it. I documented it profoundly, thoroughly, right? And all the reasons. And then everyone got on board. And now in the conversations, when you're talking to them, they are talking about it, right? And you know, and it's just so, it's one of life's joys when you lay out, well, I want to go this way, and here's my logic. And, you know, and you're respectful enough to document it, let everybody buy it. And we're not walking away from one thing we're doing, right?
No,
right?
you're just adding to it.
We're just adding to it. And we're just going to put this element of growth in, which means these are the reasons that we've got to do, and we're going that way. But we will build, I think we could build a business 10 times bigger than what we've got. Right? That's my belief. And, you know, and this is why, this is how, and with AI, you know, like there's a lot of issues with regards to compliance and councils and aged care and the NDIS and our SILs who run our homes. And, you know, there's just so many regulatory bits and pieces in there. But I spent a lot of time before I did it with AI to just make sure that the plan could work. So, yeah, you've got to build a vision, but then let other people take ownership and then help come behind them and let them see it, because it can't be my plan. It's got to be our plan. And, you know, and they'll work it. They'll work it.
Yeah, and the reality is, while you don't want to age, you are aging. And so the vision has to live past you.
Yeah, and I don't want to retire.
No.
I got friends who retire. Most of the people, you know, I guess given the game so long, are out, and they're burnt. A lot of them are burnt. And I mean, I'm not burnt financially, just burnt as
Energy.
Yeah, I just don't want to do it anymore, you know. And that. But then if you're passionate and you play the rules, you know, if you don't like the game, if you don't like the rules, change the game. If you don't like the game, change the rules. You know, and I'm excited about what that could do, and I'd like to be involved in that sector. I think we can add value in that sector, and I think it's an exciting opportunity. So I don't want to retire.
Yeah.
I think if you worked all your life to get a set of brains, you know, like I always had the motivation, like, and it was dangerous, and I was always felt, and the energy I had was a curse because it got me into trouble, not in a married sense. But, you know, like if anyone had a business idea or they wanted a partner, let's go and do it, right? And, you know, like bursting of energy, but I didn't have the core, you know, freaking property agent. You know, that's no free ticket anyway. So, you know, to get the brains and build up that resource through all that, the business experience and who to believe and who you don't want involved in your life and all those sorts of things. To get to a stage where you're a graduate, which I think I took to my 60s to become a graduate, you know, and contented in my own body. I'd gone to the gates of hell, bounced back, bought another RS Porsche, and we were doing pretty well, you know. And you know, you contented. Well, I proved I could bounce back, right? And that we did in our life, and all through the stress, you know, no marital problems. We'd all moved to fight another day. And, you know, anyway, you get to a certain stage where I feel that you've got the gift of wisdom, but then why leave the paddock? Now you've got all the elements to really make a difference and do what you want to do. And I don't report to anybody. You know, I don't have a bank I report to. You know, I don't need, whatever I do with this venture is only up to me. The only person I've got to make it happen is me, and make sure my team's looked after. And I think that's a great way to go. I'm doing what I want to do. You set the business up and you resource it. You give it the, you know, every second point of where it needs to go. And I think it's fun, right? I think it's fun. But, you know, what am I going to do all day? You know, sitting, you know, it's TVs and, you know, like doom scrolling, doom channel surfing. You know, I think I can do that, but I can lay some really good bombs. And we're doing some exciting things. We're about to do some focus groups on memory care homes.
Yeah.
And it's just fascinating. And you know, about dementia, It's 1 in 3 people born today are going to get dementia. It's massive. But it's a specialist area. So, I joined all these dementia pages, and I can tell you the amount of freaking Facebook marketing I get now for Depends and all the things that think I've got dementia or my wife's got dementia. But, the thing is that I'm interested and it's a chapter of people's lives. And, I think that we can add some of the, we've got high care homes. We can just do a new line of high care homes. We do 24-hour care. We just do another line of 24-hour care. These are people over 65. Currently, we specialise in people under 65. So it's a great addendum, but it's one that's going to be massive over the next 20 years. And I don't need anyone's help. I don't need anybody's help. And when people ask me about it, and I got a couple of people that ask me like over a coffee how it's going, right? And I sort of got to put the brakes right on it because like people just want like an elevator version, 2 words, 3 words. There's just so much there. And you got to entertain yourself, which is why Grok, if you don't use Grok, like Grok's fantastic, and I have so much of a resource of questions I ask. And it's my COO, I tell her it's my COO. And if you're not using AI to its ability, you ask it smart questions. And Grok's fantastic. And I think I've been able to put a national model together that's got a massive opportunity. And, now I've just got other people convinced of doing.
Yeah. You and I could probably talk forever on these different topics, but I will round it out there. Thank you so much for being part of this chat. If people wanted to learn more about, I guess, SD housing, aerial care, and the memory housing, where should they go? What should they do?
Well, our core company, Property Direct, if you Google Property Direct, you'll end up at the website. Our building business is SDA, which is now, SDA, which is Specialist Disability Accommodation, sdasmarthomes.com.au. We own the Disability Housing Centre, which is where our tenant matching service is, and aerial care, aerial.care, just aerial.care, aerial care. But, that's our businesses, and we're moving across into memory care to add that, which we think is a good sister business. And, that's probably where you can find me. Or David B at propertydirect.com.au. David B at propertydirect.com.au.
Perfect. Thank you so much. If you have comments or questions for David, feel free to drop them below. Like and comment on this post, and remember to share it with your friends.
Thanks, Katie.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.